Right guys, welcome to this brief video with my predictions for Paper 2 2024. So before we get started, just like with Paper 1, here is a quick rundown on some of the basics of this video. So any prediction that I make is solely based on what's come up in the past across both AS and A-level papers, and with the exception of research methods, it's going to focus mainly on the 16 markers with perhaps a little bit of the 8 markers as well. Obviously, it goes without saying that this is only my opinion, and AQA can do anything that they want to regardless of what has come up in the past, so please make sure you carry on revising everything. I'm going to show you what's come up in the past so that you can see why I've predicted what I have. That way you can also have a think about what you think might come up, and maybe you'll see something in the topics that I've missed, and if you do, please feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. And just finally, if the video is useful, a like would be amazing. So let's start off with our first topic, which is approaches. Okay, and this is what's come up in approaches since 2016. Anything in blue is an AS paper, but even if you don't do AS, it's handy to know what has come up in those papers because AQA have a little bit of a habit of reusing questions. As you can see, a lot of the topics have already appeared, however we have relatively few 16 markers compared to 12 and 8 markers. Okay, so there's only been 3 16 markers since 2016, and that's because AQA like to break topics up into smaller essays and make 8 markers out of them. However, that being said, there are some topics that stick out as being extended writing possibilities for this year. So the origins of psychology has not come up since 2019. Okay, so that includes the work of Wilhelm Wundt and the emergence of psychology as a science. Now, those topics tend to be 8 markers, but there's no reason why those two couldn't come up as one 16 marker, so that might be something to look into. Social learning theory and the cognitive approach have not come up as a 16 marker at all at A-level. However, they have been incredibly popular in short answer questions in the last couple of years. However, there's never been an actual 16 marker on either of them. The biological approach hasn't had an essay since 2019 in the AS series, and it's never come up as a 16 marker in an A-level paper, which makes it a fairly strong contender. And then finally, you've got the psychodynamic approach, which has never been tested as an essay, whether that is an 8 marker or a 16 marker. Okay, so I've been waiting for quite a while now for an essay on the psychodynamic approach, perhaps even an essay with a STEM, and this year is potentially when that could happen. Okay, it could of course come up as an 8 marker as well, so maybe something like outline and evaluate the psychosexual stages of development, so prepare for both and have a little look at the model essay that's linked at the top of your screen now or in the description section below if you're not certain on how you would word it. Okay, but the psychodynamic approach is where I'm putting my money this year. Next, we've got biopsychology. So over the last few years, the focus has very much been on the brain. Okay, so localization of function, plasticity and functional recovery, investigating the brain, and hemispheric lateralization. Now, I don't think we're going to get another essay on the brain. However, it is worth mentioning that hemispheric lateralization and split brain research is the only topic out of those 4 that hasn't had a 16 marker to itself yet. Okay, so for completion's sake, AQA might think they're going to want to do that. However, I think that this year, in reality, if there's going to be a 16 marker in biopsych, then it's most likely going to be on the biological rhythms. Simply because that is the area that hasn't been tested yet in extended writing, with the exception of the exogenous Zeitgeber's essay in 2018, which was an 8 marker. Okay, so I'm thinking possibly something like outline and evaluate research into infradian and ultradian rhythms might be a nice one. Possibly outline and evaluate research into circadian rhythms. Biopsychology lends itself quite nicely to an application, so perhaps a 16 marker with a STEM is a possibility. Okay, also have a look at the model essays that I've linked into the description section on biological rhythms to help you work out what you're going to write if those topics come up. Now, I've also added a little bit of a rogue topic here, and that is fight or flight. Now, I'm not entirely convinced that it would come up, and if it did, it would definitely be an 8 marker rather than a 16 marker, I think. But AQA have been including some tricky questions in the last couple of years that a lot of people, me included, didn't see coming. So a small part of me is just wondering whether it's something that they would do, especially as fight or flight is named in the spec, and so technically it's fair game. Like I said, it's a rogue guess, and I still think that the biological rhythms are more likely, but something is just there in the back of my mind telling me to do a little bit of prep for it. Okay, and then our final topic is research methods. And with this topic, it's incredibly hard to make predictions about what's going to come up because there is so much and so many of the topics are linked or at least can be linked, which is often the way that the section is laid out. So I think the general rule is revise everything because everything is fair game. However, that being said, we can possibly narrow it down a little bit just to give you a place to focus your revision, or at least start your revision. So let's start with what we know. Paper 2s often have extended writing tasks, and they are generally designer study questions. We had a designer study task in 2017, 2019, 2020, and 2022. 2023 was slightly different in that the designer study question was split across a lot of little questions, which was quite interesting because it allowed AQA to test knowledge but also to test understanding, because all the answers that students gave had to be linked to something that they'd done earlier or had to at least show a little bit of continuity. So students had to show that they understood what they'd done previously and how that linked into what they were doing in this particular question. That might be the new way that AQA are going to do it. They might also just think that it's been 2 years since the last designer study question, and so they're going to chuck another one in. But if they do keep that format of splitting it over a lot of little questions, then it opens up the possibility for some different extended writing in research methods. So for example, in 2021 there was an 8-mark essay on features of science, and that was in the absence of the designer study question. Okay, so if they leave designer study out, they could potentially give some 8-mark essays on other things. So possibilities might be things like report writing, maybe write an abstract or write a procedure or a results section. You're not going to get asked to write an introduction or a discussion because that's too long and detailed, but one of the smaller sections wouldn't be too far-fetched. You could possibly get an ethics-related task, like write a consent form or a debrief. Okay. Now, we also know that there are some common topics every year which are on your screen now. Okay, so things like controlling variables comes up all the time. How can you reduce the impact of things like demand characteristics or participant variables, that kind of thing. Data analysis has also been quite popular lately, particularly questions that ask you to draw a conclusion from a data set, and statistical testing is pretty much a given. Okay, so make sure you know how to identify the correct test and how to establish significance. Also, little things like type 1, type 2 errors, they've also come up lately, and so that might just be something to have a look at. And then finally, validity and reliability are also very popular, not just what they mean, but also how to assess them, and more importantly, how to improve them for the different types of research. Okay, so whether that's for a self-report study, or an observation, or an experiment, or whatever, assessing and improving. Okay, and then we can also pick out the topics that haven't come up for a while and that might just be worth going over again. Okay, so they're on the right of the screen now. That's things like correlations, case studies, features of science, report writing, that kind of stuff. All right. So just 2 final bits then before we finish up. First off, a little bit of a trend that I've been noticing with AQA is that they seem to be moving away from assessing knowledge and towards assessing understanding. So rather than asking what is ordinal data, they might ask what kind of data a particular technique is likely to produce and why. Or they might ask something like, why is ordinal data less scientific than interval data? Or a couple of years ago, they asked, why might it be better to conduct a case study than a questionnaire in this particular situation, rather than just asking for a strength of a case study and a limitation of a questionnaire? Okay, so as part of your revision, try to ask why something is what it is, rather than just asking what that thing is, because there's going to be a lot of marks available for being able to explain your answer in the context of the STEM or of the question. And then lastly, please remember that research methods is often a continuous section, which means that often many, if not all of the questions are linked. Now obviously, it's not always the case, but just pay attention to the stems because they have important information in them. Pay attention to the questions that are being asked because often they link to something that you've done previously. And also pay attention to your answers because they might be needed later in the section. Okay? Now please remember these predictions are educated guesses, they are not certainties, but they're a good place to start your revision or to focus your revision. Please make use of the exam practice videos that I've got. Some of them will have been appearing on the screen throughout, a lot of them will be in the description section below. Good luck with paper 2. Well done for all the work that you've put in so far, and if you have any questions, please pop them in the comment section below. Thank you very much for listening, and I will see you in the paper 3 video.